Welcome to Bluegrass Brooklyn, our podcast all about the music we love, straight from the Bluegrass borough of Brooklyn, New York.
All of my friends that I loved yesterday gone home. They have gone home. Gone home. They have gone home. Songbird sings.
Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 6. I am Liz Wolfe.
And I'm Mike Wilner.
I am so excited today to be presenting an episode with my good friend Gene Yellin. He takes us back to the 50s and 60s where we really learned some cool stuff about his adventures then.
Yeah, pretty amazing musical life.
Yes, and musical family.
Yeah, that's right. And also after that interview, we'll have a little bit more about the history and formation of the bluegrass and folk music movement here in the New York area. Alan Kaufman, noted old-time fiddle player, shares his musical journey through that historical period. So Liz, what do you got going on?
So on Monday night, December 15th at Chris Kindred's studio out in Hackensack, New Jersey, we're going to be having our Jam Jersey launch holiday party.
Fun.
So come out and jam. It's going to be lots of fun. And we have already had to add another block of rooms to the hotel for the Jam Jersey event happening in March 20 through 22, 2026. So don't wait if you're thinking about coming to book your hotel room. Also getting revved up for the Della Mae concert that's happening January 28th, and looking forward to sharing the interview I had with Avril Smith in just a couple weeks.
That's at the Jalopy Theater here in Brooklyn, right?
That's right. That's a jalopy. So what do you have going on, Mike?
Okay, so locally, if you're in the city on December 21st, you have to check out Flatfoot Flatbush. They'll be gathering about 1 p.m. on Flatbush Avenue in Sterling and dancing, fiddling, guitaring, singing their way up the avenue. And it's a tremendous party. Please join us there. Speaking of tremendous parties, New Year's Eve plans, I'm going up to the winter camp at the Ashokan Center. I'll be going up there on December 29th till January 1st, 2026. And it's a huge dance party, concert, jam, you name it, all kinds of celebratory stuff going on, plus workshops and classes and everything. We'll see you there.
And don't forget to follow us at Bluegrass Brooklyn. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Bluegrass Brooklyn, spelled BKLYN. And of course, you can find us online at bluegrassbrooklyn, BKLYN.com.
You can find all the information about the music in this episode in the program notes. The introduction music was Gone Home by our guest, Gene Yellin. So I think that's it, Liz. Should we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's roll.
Hello and welcome, everybody. Very excited today to invite my friend Gene Yellin onto the show.
Thank you, Liz. I'm very happy to be here.
So Gene and I are friends and we are singing buddies. This is how I met Gene. We actually met at Jim Kendrick's house concert. And I don't know, I'm the kind of person that when I find out somebody likes to sing, I say, you know what, we should get together to sing. And so we have been doing that ever since. Now, that was pre-pandemic.
That's right. That's right.
And then we kept singing through the pandemic as well. And actually have worked up quite a few songs that we like to do together. And so that has been a true joy for me because, as you know, I always love when I can find people that love to sing and to harmonize. So I didn't know this about Gene, but he's got a whole history of a bluegrass life before he met me. And so I thought it'd be fun to invite Gene on to hear about some of it. But before we get to that, let's start with some of the things you're currently doing. I know, for instance, you're playing with Andy Statman, other things. So tell us a little bit about your musical adventures in New York City.
Yeah, so I'm playing in this ensemble with Andy Statman and Terry McGill, and it's the three of us, and we get together every week, actually, at Andy's house, and we work up material. And then we maybe throughout the course of the year, we'll do about 6 or 7 gigs. But the joy is actually getting together in his house and just working up stuff and playing together and jamming. And that's my love. Andy's an amazing person to play music with, as you probably know. And Terry McGill, he's one of the best banjo players to ever come out of this area. And then the other thing is that I'm lucky enough to get together with Phyllis Alkine and Samantha Dallas. And Samantha I've only met in the last few years. And Phyllis I've known for about 10 or 15 years. We just get together and work up trio singing. And then we've done a handful of gigs where we'll have an instrumentalist play with us, but we've had a couple of concerts, brunch gigs and whatever. But the joy, again, for the three of us is just getting together and around my dining room table and working up trios. Because like you love to sing, I love to sing and I love to harmonize. And it's a total joy with Sam and Phyllis. So I'm lucky enough to have two situations that I really love.
Yes, and again, also being able to do that with you. We haven't done any gigs, but certainly it's the joy of working out those harmonies together. I spend a lot of time at Bluegrass Jams, as having organized quite a few of them, and something I keep coming back to is, what do you value the most when you're in a jam? And when the values lean towards the quote unquote picking part of the instrumental part, I sometimes feel somewhat left out. And then when it's time to do my song, I think to myself, wait, how come nobody's singing harmony with me on this right now? And so it's always good to find people who really enjoy that process of putting together songs. So you do have two brothers that are musical, one of whom is a bluegrass person.
My mother was a violinist, my father a pianist. They were professional musicians. I have a sister who went to LaGuardia high school, singing. And my brother Peter, who unfortunately passed away 10 years ago, he was a very well-known and respected jazz saxophone and flute player here in the city. My brother Bob, I guess I got into bluegrass because he got into bluegrass in the 50s. And he was going down to Washington Square. And then he formed a group that became famous at the time. But it's funny, there have been generations since then. And now there's actually bluegrass people in New York, to my amazement, who have not heard. And my brother, I used to be known as Bob's brother rather than my own name. So I'm so used to being under his shadow. He had a group called the Greenbrier Boys, and they had a record contract with Vanguard and did a lot of touring in the 60s. And they broke up in the late 60s. So I grew up with banjo, being tortured by banjo music. The whole family was. He practiced hours and hours a day. But he used to go down to Washington Square and established that tradition for all of us. Washington Square was the hub of the bluegrass community in New York in the 60s and 70s, and into maybe the early 80s as well.
And yes, that's something that I know when I spoke with Pete Wernick that he mentioned. That was also how he got involved. I can't tell the story for him, but it went something like, yeah, I was down there and playing the banjo and met some guys, and they said to me, hey, you can sing baritone. You should come with us. And then for the way he told the story, it was like, next thing you know, he was in the car heading across the bridge or through the tunnel over to New Jersey to some recording studio or something like that. I'm sure that's not exactly it. Yeah. But it sounded like a lot of that very early and exciting stages of when it was coming alive.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if this isn't relevant to bluegrass, but my brother was in the crowd of people around. He knew Dylan, he knew Ian Tyson of Vienna Sylvia, he knew there was Phil Oakes, there was Tom Paxton, the whole singer-songwriter, the whole thing that was happening in the village. I was kind of on the periphery as a 10-year younger brother, but going to a lot of concerts. And my brother lived in the village and knew all those people. He was part of this whole village folk scene, of which the bluegrass came out of that. There was a whole musical atmosphere, folk atmosphere in New York City. that I remember.
Yeah, and you yourself said that you met some interesting folks around the Washington Square Park.
Yeah, there was two of my most treasured people who I love in the bluegrass community. Neither of whom live in New York. One lives in California and the other in Kentucky. And I met both of them in Washington Square, and we hit it off. It was in 1968, and we formed a group for about 4 months. And then that spawned a 40-year friendship or more. I don't know, it was 50 years. One fellow's name is Sandy Rothman. He played with Bill Monroe. He was Bill Monroe's guitar player when in 64, I think. And then Joe Isaacs was a banjo player and singer from Kentucky who came into town with Frank Wakefield to play some gigs after the Greenbrier Boys broke up. Frank Wakefield was part of the Greenbrier Boys and brought Joe Isaacs into New York City. And Joe was in Washington Square, and that's when Sandy and Joe and I met. And Joe went on to found the Isaacs, which to this day are one of the most well-known bluegrass gospel groups in the country. They're on the Grand Ole Opry, and Joe is just a fantastic singer, guitar player, and banjo player. And then I got into a group back in the 60s. That's where I first met Andy Statman, and we had a group, and then just evolved over group to group with different musicians. But the bluegrass scene was always very vibrant in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, and to today.
To today, although from what I've heard, there was a bit of a dip, but I think if I went down to Washington Square Park, I wouldn't find any bluegrassers hanging out.
Not anymore, no.
That scene has changed. I mean, there's a lot of other bluegrass jams to go to, obviously, but it's interesting. Was it a spontaneous thing? Was it just people were in the park playing? How did it come about?
No, there's a history on that. It started with folk musicians I think starting in the early 50s. And even there are photos of Woody Guthrie in Washington Square back in the early 50s. And so the bluegrass people began coming down as well. There was a guy named Roger Sprung who was around in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. No, Roger. He was the original bluegrass person. He used to go down south and learn songs and then bring them back. So he inspired all of the bluegrass people to play bluegrass in Washington Square. But Roger was part of a larger group of folk musicians. So Washington Square was a folk music haven, and it just spontaneously began that started going down on Sundays. There were controversies. They tried to shut down the music. There's some famous protests. There's a documentary of the protests in Washington Square you could find on YouTube. It explains Washington Square a lot more articulately than I can at moment. But if you're asking anyone who played folk music or bluegrass in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they mention Washington Square. It's like, yeah, of course, everyone played down in Washington Square.
Yeah, that would have been amazing to be a part of. So you got to hang around some pretty cool folks, and one of those cool folks was also Hazel Dickens. Tell us about that.
I have a friend, Barry Mitterhoff, who is also well known in the bluegrass community. He plays mandolin. Barry, I've just known through the bluegrass scene. He came from a different group of bluegrass people in New Jersey, and I don't remember him in Washington Square, but I just remember knowing him through the scene and parties and jam sessions and whatever. He was playing with Hazel she had her Northeast band when she would get gigs in the New York, Philadelphia, Boston area. Barry would be one of the musicians she called upon. And one day Barry called me and said, Hazel needs a guitar player and singer. And I think you might be a good fit. So why don't you come over to this house and meet her and whatever. And we hit it off, just our voices and musically. And plus, she's an incredibly wonderful person. So, yeah, and Tony Trishka did a lot of those gigs with us too. So we played, I don't know, a couple dozen gigs over a period of 2 years, 2.5, 3 years maybe. 78, 79, 80 in there. And so I got to sing a lot with her. And I'm on one of her albums. It's called albums Hard-Hitting Songs for Hard-Hit People or something. So I'm on 5 cuts. And on one of the cuts, I'm singing a duet with her. But there are a lot of tape shows that it was probably the most wonderful musical experience I've had in my life was singing with her. She was just an amazing person to sing with. Her voice was just, it was like a dream bluegrass voice. And most of the gigs we did actually were political gigs because she was very involved in the union movement. And she would get hired for union events. We played the Book Academy music. We played some clubs in Boston and Philadelphia and whatever, but we did a lot of political gigs for in support of unions, which was one of Hazel. Hazel came from coal mining country in West Virginia. It was a good cause too. I felt really at home with her because of that.
Yeah, worthwhile. If you're going to get a gig, it's good to be able to have it be meaningful.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
So one of the interesting things is that you've played all these professional gigs, but yet you didn't choose to make music your profession.
Right. Well, there's a lot of angles. I mean, first of all, I never thought of myself or wanted to be a professional musician. I don't know why. It was just something, I just had it in my mind that I was going to, I'm a psychotherapist, social worker. I have a long career doing that, teaching and doing therapy. I still have a practice. And so that was my ambition. That was my passion, my vocational passions, I guess. And the people around me, my friends who became professional musicians, they worked their behinds off to get really good on their instruments. And it was something that I knew I did not have the ambition to sit down with a guitar for hours working up flat picking solos. I got to be a decent rhythm player, but I was never really interested in all the hours you'd have to spend to be an instrumentalist. Plus, I had this is kind of a silly thing to say, but I'll say it anyway, that I did a weekend once with Breakfast Special, which is a group that Andy and Kenny Kosak and Roger Mason. I don't remember. Oh, Marty Cutler was on that. It was on this weekend tour we did. Tony Trischka used to play in Breakfast Special. So I did this weekend tour where we hit 3 or 4 cities, upstate, Buffalo, near the Canadian border. It was 3 or 4 days of constantly being in the car and then waiting hours to perform. And then you perform for an hour and a half, maybe. And then there's all this waiting or writing. So there was something about that. I said that almost justified that this is not a life that appeals to me. I've always marveled at people who can be on the road as much as they are.
Yeah. When you think about the percentage of the time that you get to actually play music in front of people versus the traveling to or the afterwards of having played music with people.
It's almost crazy for me. I had one weekend of it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and also because I remember once I think I asked you why when we're at the jam, you don't like to take breaks. And you told me essentially this. And it gave me some perspective because especially since starting as a guitar player much later in my life, and again, wanting to be the one to be the singing. That's what I want to do is sing. It let me off the hook a little bit because I thought, okay, sure, I should get good enough to be able to, if somebody calls on me for a break, to do it. But it's okay if that's not your main focus. I go back to, what do you value? I value the vocals. Other people value the music different ways.
Right.
To encourage anyone that might be listening, again, one of the reasons why I love jam so much is because it makes music accessible. Even if you can just strum G, C, and D and you have a capo, for those of us who play the guitar. So you were also telling me that you went to the second Bluegrass Festival.
Yeah, the passion that I have for bluegrass comes from my brother had all of these live tapes of the first generation bluegrass players, Jimmy Martin, the Stanley Brothers, Jim and Jesse, Reno and Smiley, Bill Monroe, etc. All of those people were active when I first got into the music, and but then there was the first Bluegrass Festival, and we all heard about that. There was actually we had a festival with all of these bands in one place for 3 or 4 days. It was like heaven, heaven. So, and it was in Virginia. So I remember driving down with a guy named Marty Rose, who was big on the scene at that time, and Andy Statman, and other friends of ours. We drove down to Roanoke. There was one in 65, which I didn't get to go to. And then there was the second one, I think was in 66. And I did go, and Andy and I were together at that because we had met in that year. And Andy was as passionate as I was, or vice versa, as passionate as he was. And yeah, so that first Bluegrass Festival that we went to, which was the second one in Roanoke, Virginia, was just, I can't even express how amazing it was to see all of these. And some of these guys who, it was amazing for them too. You could see how excited they were to be in the same place as all of their cohorts. And there was this unbelievable moment where the Osborne brothers sang I Hear a Sweet Voice Calling, which is one of this great song that's on an early Bill Monroe record. And the Osborne brothers and Bill Monroe came on stage and sang that. And Sonny Osborne was actually crying during the trio of the song. And just mentioning that to try to get across the joy of these people getting together, these bands getting together. It was really special. And it was the spawning of that whole Bluegrass Festival phenomenon, which has not ended.
No, it has not. It's expanded exponentially. And sometimes I think I'm going to get in my RV and I'm going to drive around to all of them. And then when I ever really research it, I go, that's not possible. There's too many. And so was there playing? Was there picking?
Oh, yeah. See, that's something which doesn't exist today. But back, I went to a lot of festivals over the next 10 years or so. There was the parking lot. They called it parking lot picking, but it was really in the campgrounds, and that was one of the joys of being at these festivals, is that people would play off the stage, including the people from the bands would come out. I remember watching famous fiddle player Kenny Baker conduct a jam session. And I remember going to different tents at night and then hearing Del McCurry singing with somebody. At Sunset Park, I had this experience. I went to hear Jimmy Martin, and in the parking lot behind the stage at Sunset Park, Jimmy Martin and the McCurry brothers, Del and his brother Jerry, they were singing trios up behind, just playing. It's the first time, get a kick out of this, first time that I realized that the baritone part is like amazing, because Jimmy Martin was singing baritone to the McCurry brothers and the trio. And when he put his part in, the trio just, it obtained a different feel to it that was just magical. And of course, Jimmy Martin is like one of the greatest singers of all time. But just to hear him singing that part with the McCurry brothers is something I'll never forget.
Wow, those are incredible memories. Thank you for sharing them with us. So you do have some concerts coming up where you're playing with Andy Statman and Terry McGill, and one of them is going to be right here in Brooklyn at the Jalopy Theater on January 18th. Right. That is going to be a fun show. And then you have one coming up on January 25th?
Yes, that's right. The one in Poughkeepsie with the Hudson Valley Bluegrass Association is on January 25th. And then March 15th at Paul Friedman's house in Brooklyn.
So if people want to find out more about your schedule, do you have a place where people can go?
They can email me
Okay.
We don't have a website, but gyellin1@rcn.com.
Okay. So we will put that in the program notes. And of course, if people go on to the Jalopy Theater website, it will be listed on there. And the Hudson Valley Bluegrass Association will, of course, list it on their site. So if they want more information about the house concert at Paul Freeman's, then they can email you about that.
Yeah.
So there's lots going on, lots of opportunities. Of course, it's double joy, triple joy, because you get to see you and Andy, who has also got an episode on this podcast. So I really want to thank you for joining us on this podcast. Again, I have just had so much joy singing and playing with you, and really feel so privileged to have had that opportunity and to have that insight into your rest of your world.
Thank you. Well, vice versa. I love singing with you, and it's their pleasure. Total.
Once again, thank you for joining.
You got it. Thanks a lot.
The bills are all due. Babies need shoes. I'm busted. Cotton is down to.
So I'm Alan Kaufman, and I'm from Brooklyn. Born and raised in Brooklyn, in Borough Park. I spent much of my early life in Borough Park. So I was born in 1953 in Borough Park, Brooklyn. I have an older brother. His name is Harvey, and he's 5 years my senior. And early on, he got very, very interested in playing music, and very, very good. He was a guitarist and a singer, an amazing singer, and a phenomenal finger-picking guitarist, but also quite decent with flat picking. So I basically was in his shadow. We were in a small apartment in Borough Park, and I shared a bedroom with him. So we weren't very close because we shared the same bedroom. And he was very much into playing music, and he was definitely involved in the whole folk scare. So whether I wanted to or not, I was exposed to this stuff. And he grew into a phenomenal guitarist. He was also incredibly gifted as a singer. We used to listen at some point to like the New Low City Ramblers and stuff like that. And his voice, you couldn't tell the difference between his voice and Mike Seeger's voice. He had all the inflections and all the sound, just phenomenal. Around the time I was, I guess, 12, 13 years old, my brother was in a music group, kind of garage band, but it was, it was just kids getting together, playing Kingston Trio music. And they had the chino pants and the striped shirts and everything. And I started on playing mandolin. My brother kind of instructed me. There was this recording of Woody's Rag, which is a very fundamental mandolin tune. And he showed me how to play it on the mandolin. And But basically at this time I was just playing in the house. I didn't know any other people. It was just my brother. My brother was outside in the world, but I didn't go into any concerts, even though my brother would go to concerts in the Village and Washington Square Park. And so I would hear about these worlds, and Folk City, Gertie's, and the Gaslight. My brother would go to these things. He was 5 years older than I. So I just heard about this world. And I was also dyslexic. I had really a lot of trouble reading. And when I started playing mandolin, my mother would schlep me to the library, the Borough Park branch of the Brooklyn Public Library, and the off chance that I would come home with books, but I would always disappoint her. But one day I was walking around because I had nothing else to do, and I found this section of the library that had records, LP records. And I was really interested in them. And I recognized some of the names of the artists because they were the records that my brother would be listening to. And some of them I found kind of really interesting, a lot of Folkways records. I started to take home some of the records. And my mother was impressed I was taking home something, but it wasn't books. In those days, they had little inserts, little pieces of paper that would have the words to the songs and information, biographical information about the artists and what have you. So I learned how to read by reading the liner notes of Folkways records, which is quite extraordinary. My brother started taking me to some concerts, and there were concerts already that at the McBurney Y, there were a lot of bluegrass concerts already, and also Doug Tuckman, an impresario at the time, was also putting on bluegrass concerts in NYU. Bernie Clay's Bluegrass concerts were at the McBurney Y next to the Chelsea Hotel. And it was very thrilling, actually, to see these people. I saw Monroe live, and as a kid, and I was in the green room, and my brother dragged me in there, and I don't know how I had the courage to, but I asked him if I could hold his mandolin, and he just took it off his shoulder and just gave it to me. This was before Bean Blossom, before festival. He was trying to really encourage the urban audiences to really get involved in bluegrass. There was no such thing as bluegrass festivals at that point. But, so he was really a very open man. I really got into playing mandolin and learning fiddle tunes and playing with my brother. But it was mainly, I was doing it in the house, And this continued through when I was in high school. I was playing the same thing. And then when I got into college in 1970, my life changed. Brooklyn College. The first day, 1970, September, I was registering for classes. And I was sitting on the grass on the quad. And I had my mandolin with me because I knew, I didn't read, it's just like, so I like to noodle around on the mandolin. So I brought it with me. It's a small instrument, easy to carry. I was sitting and playing fiddle tunes on the mandolin. And this big hulking guy happened to have a D28 in a case. He hears me playing and he sits down. Would you mind if I played some with you? I said, sure. He opens his guitar and he starts playing. And his name was Bob Jones. And that would be a major change in my life, because that was actually the beginning of what ended up being the Wretched Refuse, which was an iconic band in early Brooklyn and New York City, bluegrass and old time history. And it was a lot of fun. So within a few days of being a student at Brooklyn College, not only was I playing music, but I was in this whole culture, which was very new to me because I was a total introvert. I didn't know how to deal with people. And all of a sudden I found these people friending me and befriending me, and I didn't know why they liked me, So it's like all of a sudden everyone was glomming onto me. I couldn't understand it, but nonetheless it was interesting, and I put up with it. And I started going to Washington Square Park on Sundays. That was the big thing in New York, Washington Square Park. By the time I started going to it, which was in 1970 already, it was starting to peter out. There were still people playing in the park up by the monument, but it was much less of a vital scene than it was 4 or 5 years prior. So where did you have access in the old days? Mainly in Bernie Clay and Doug Tuckman had concerts. There were also these Sam Ash record stores that would have whole bunches of wonderful records. So there was these 69-cent stores, the bargain stores, and they have cutouts you can get cutouts of amazing bluegrass players, of Bill Keith, of Jim Rooney, of the kind of records that would be even hard to find in Sam Ash, you can find in the 69-cent stores as cutouts. There were, in the Village Voice, there were amazing things going on in 1970 to 74. And so again, in terms of concerts, it was mainly 3 things, as I remember. There was Bernie Clay's concerts at the McBurney Y. There was Doug Tuckman's concerts at the NYU and elsewhere, and Izzy Young's concerts in the Folklore Center and also in the Methodist Church on 6th Avenue. So at the time, there really wasn't like a vital New York scene. There were people who were just learning. And I was a teacher at the Fred Instrument School of Folk Music. One day, someone came up the stairs, and I noticed as I was walking up the stairs, they didn't have an instrument. So what are they coming to study with me? Yeah, but they had a little bag, and they introduced themselves as Alfred Urey and Bob Waldman. And Alfred was an English teacher, and Bob Waldman was a composer. And they were working on putting together this idea for a musical. And the musical took place basically in the 1700s or 1700s in Georgia. So they wanted to have some period music for the dance sequences in this musical. They had a tape recorder in the bag, a Craig cassette tape recorder. They said, would you be so kind to just play some fiddle tunes for us? And maybe, we can get some idea about what this dance music would be like, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, sure. So I played some. And then they came back the next Sunday and they said, we're putting together this little kind of laboratory thing of reading and trying to move this idea for this musical further. And we have some people who might be willing to invest. And could you put together a group of musicians to play some of this stuff? And I said, sure. To make a long story short, this was the birth of a Broadway musical called The Robber Bridegroom. It ended up being a Broadway musical. So one thing led to the other. And eventually it moved to Broadway. When it moved to Broadway, we got other live musicians. And the live musicians were Bob Jones, Steve Mandel. Steve Mandel was the guitarist for Dueling Banjos. With Eric Weisberg, it was Steve Mandel and Eric Weisberg. And so it was me and Steve Mandel and Bob Jones and Evan Stover, who was a great fiddler. Afterwards, it was Kenny Kosick and Tony Trishka. I shared an apartment with Tony for months. And on Broadway, we did shows like every day and twice per matinees. I ended up as housemates with Tony, and we would play constantly fiddle tunes and what have you. I taught him a whole bunch of fiddle tunes. And one of the books of a whole bunch of the fiddle tunes were fiddle tunes. And then I eventually moved to Manhattan Beach with Michelle Weiss, who was part of Wretched Refuse. And, that's right by Brighton. And I have a love affair for Mrs. Stahl's knishes, the best knishes in the world. I'm not saying this to brag, but it's just something that happens with youth. The 75% of my technical competence I had within 6 months of playing the violin. In other words, if you were back in the day, basically, and heard me play enough so that you would remember and then heard me today, you would recognize me. So for some reason, maybe because of the excitement and my focus, when I started playing, when I started playing mandolin early, fiddle, I started playing after the beginning of Wretched Refuse. I think I got my first fiddle as a rental from Sam Ash for $3 a month rental. And this was late 74. My areas of abilities as a teacher are in fiddle, mandolin, and guitar, but I'm also a yodeler. I'm known somewhat as a yodeler. I was part of a skit that on a Jimmy Fallon skit that has over 8 million views with Jimmy Fallon and Brad Pitt yodeling on the two kind of skyscrapers to each other with subtitles. So it wasn't Brad Pitt and Jimmy Fallon yodeling. It was me and two others, Spiff Wygand and Chris Greeter. If you do a search on Fallon and yodel, you'll come up with it. I'm so glad to do this. And so anyone who wants to get in touch with me, it's alanfiddler@gmail.com, ALANFIDDLER @gmail.com. And if you want to talk about the old days in New York, I'd be glad to do that.
Well, that really was a very fun interview with Gene, just reminiscing on all those cool memories. I a little bit wish that I was around in the bluegrass scene at that time in Washington Square Park, and a part of me wants to start it all up again. Don't you think we should do a jam in Washington Square Park?
That might be a little bit interesting if you know the park nowadays. But I think that maybe we have something equivalent. I mean, people talk about Jalopy and Mona's Jam and places like that. You talk to them all over the country and they know about this stuff. So maybe our generation has some of that magic too.
I also found the tidbits that Alan shared with us about Brooklyn and what it was like to live and grow up there, to be fascinating. I love history. I love listening to all that.
Yeah, we still have some of that generation, people who lived through that, and we can get to hear about it from them. And we get to hear about how central New York and Brooklyn was to the bluegrass movement. And that's why we are the Bluegrass Borough. Okay, so please remember to follow us at Bluegrass Brooklyn, Brooklyn spelled BKLYN, on social media. Visit us at bluegrassbrooklyn.com. Please subscribe to, comment, and tell all your friends about the podcast. And if you have any topics or questions or anything you'd like us to consider, just send an email to mike@bluegrassbrooklyn.com. Okay, Liz, I think we should wrap it up.
Yes, sure thing.
Okay, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you around the jam circle.
I met a girl out in the hills who gave my lonely heart a thrill. Her beauty seemed just like a breath of spring. And when I looked into her eyes, I thought them blue as summer skies. And when I held her hand in mine, I heard the bluebird sing. Sing up wondering, do you love her? Will she marry? Marry if you ask her. Will her heart beat true for him?